the case, which I think is coming up on the 9th of April, is Tickle versus Giggle. You are the head of Giggle.
A social networking app exclusively for women, where women could go to find roommates, freelance work, like a Twitter-style forum with lesbian dating, emotional support. I mean, you could, like, lots of different things. I had absolutely no idea that there was any question, any controversy over what a woman is. On the 7th of February 2020, we were just on the App Store and Google Play, just doing beta testing. Trans rights activists found the app, and thousands of them invaded it.
Roxanne Tickle, and this is a guy who's identifying as a woman. How have you ended up actually in court with this person?
On the 20th of January 2022, I received an Australian Human Rights Commission complaint alleging gender identity discrimination against both Giggle, the app, and me personally. Us saying, this is for females, this person is not a female. He had onboarded the app, and I had removed, as I said, thousands of men would attack it constantly. To have a female-only online space, we had to be like, well, how do you keep it female-only? In the Australian Human Rights Commission, a place where you can clear up and settle an issue before it goes to court. So you can go to conciliation. But the conditions for settlement were that I would have to let him on the app, that I would have to go to sex and gender education, and that I would have to moderate the content on the app so that men who claimed to be women weren't offended by what women were saying. And I was just like, I'm not going to agree to any of these things. If it can't be settled in conciliation in the Australian Human Rights Commission, they advise the applicant that they can file in federal court, and they've got 60 days to do it. So he did. On the 60th day, he filed in federal court. He withdrew the case. And so we were shocked because we were like, did we just have basically a win? And then in December 2022, he refiled. He refiled on that initial claim. So he was now 260 days or something out of time. So he actually had to get permission from the court. In April last year, the federal court said, yes, it can go ahead. And one of the reasons why they've allowed it to go ahead was because it's in the public interest, which has been my frustration with the censorship, because I was like, this is going ahead because it's in the public interest. So I think that the public deserves to know about it. But then if no media in Australia will speak to me, they won't even speak to him. It's not like, we've got the ABC, which is, our version of BBC. But usually they will write any article either praising the trans and gender diverse community or articles saying about how oppressed they are, how marginalized, these rights. Nothing. They will not report on this. The case is the first very specific sex versus gender identity case of this magnitude. It is the what is a woman case. What happened is in 2013, the Australian Sex Discrimination Act was amended. This was under Julia Gillard's government. And the definition of sex was taken out, as were the definitions of men and women. What was put in was gender identity. And it was given a definition, but the definition is effectively gender identity is gender identity. They don't explain what it is. What they did is they created a conflict because gender identity is in direct conflict with sex, because the people who claim to have one, it's going to be the opposite of what their sex is. So it will be a man claiming to be a woman or a woman claiming to be a man. Then you actually have all of the other neo-genders. You've got non-binary, cloud gender, astrogender, just these ridiculous, things that they've invented that aren't real. It seems like there's this plan to have gender identity supersede sex in law. That seems to be the intention. Have gender identity supersede sex in law. That seems to be the intention. I know that because the Australian Human Rights Commission, who, that's where the complaint initially was, they have actually intervened in the case. In their application to intervene in the case, they said, yes, there is a conflict of sex and gender, and then they have proceeded to solve that problem with gender. So while the case is Tickle v. Giggle, it is also effectively me versus the government, because the government is saying men are women, and basically everyone has to believe that and act upon that. So part of our defense is a constitutional challenge. And the reason for that is that the Australian Sex Discrimination Act is based on CEDAW, the Convention of the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and Girls. It's a UN convention. It's signed by 189 countries in the world. Is that Australia incorporated it into law. CEDAW was created in 1979. Australia signed it in 1983. Our Sex Discrimination Act was created in 1984. CEDAW is a document about biology. It is female. Because these amendments came in and they've put gender identity in, which gender identity isn't in CEDAW, there's a very strong argument to be made that the amendments themselves are unconstitutional. They shouldn't be there in the first place. We're in a situation where we've got the Sex Discrimination Act, and we're supposed to accept that discrimination and act have established definitions, but sex doesn't. Yeah. And part of the reason for that is that they want to create this new concept called legal sex. Legal sex is essentially, that's gender identity. The only people who are benefiting from this are actually the men who claim to be women, because women's rights have all been based on they're called sex-based rights because they're based on needs that are dictated by our biological sex. So that, it's maternity leave and all of these things that are very specific to women. You could have gender identity in some part of law, say in terms of like a freedom of belief type thing, because I think anyone can think whatever they want about themselves in a free society. Having it in the Sex Discrimination Act has completely muddled it and created this conflict completely unnecessarily. So it's like either the plan was really quite sinister and they planned to completely remove women's rights out of utter incompetence, and they just never even thought about it, because it takes seconds to go, oh, hang on, men can claim to be women. What does that do? That destroys women's spaces in sports, which is part of the whole reason the act exists.
The whole movement, it seems to be basically pro-men, and men sort of essentially moving into these sort of areas.
Because it sort of dawned on me recently that because I created a digital female-only space, and so I had the power to sort of remove these men in a very safe way, that kind of, I unknowingly walked into being able to be in this position where one of them could maybe come back and like legally come after me. Because in real life female-only spaces, women self-exclude. They get themselves out of that because we're scared.
Yes.
But if you've got a man in a female-only space, like a bathroom or a change room, you are already dealing with somebody who has no respect for your boundaries. So there's an argument to be made you're already dealing with a predator, because good men just don't go in. Good men just don't go in to female-only spaces. They understand the social contract, which is most men, obviously. Female-only spaces literally exist to protect us from the men who want to go into them.
It would be a legal change, wouldn't it? This is why the implications are so big, aren't they?
Yes. So because we're engaging CDAW, and because that's what Australia's Sex Discrimination Act is based on, the implications for the case, like the verdict, will be felt globally by those 189 countries. So this is the UK we're talking about, and Canada, which is also, just Canada is what it's called. The case will be able to be cited for women to be able to get their sex-based rights back in those countries as well. If we lose, women's rights cease to exist in international law. That's what's at stake.
Yeah.
Because it would be that CDAW is not for women and girls. Like it would be changing everything.
There's a crowdfunder for the trial date, so it's definitely going ahead on the 9th of April in 4 days. The Google search of ABC News and transgender comes up with all of these news stories. They're just countless. They just keep going on and on. And when you type in one of their parties in the ABC News website, you get 0. Now, the only online publications that covered it were the Daily Telegraph and The Australian, but that was last year in the lead-up cases. They're not mentioning the trial on the 9th. Now, binary.org is the only Australian website that seems to be covering it, so I'll be coming back to here on the 9th, although I suspect that if Roxanne Tickle wins, it's going to be all over ABC News, Channel 9, 7, 10, where it hasn't been so far. Now, some people may know that I have a slight conspiracy theorist angle to my videos, and when I look at this little clip here, you have to wonder whether perhaps if they do lose, whether Sally, the proprietor of Giggle, may be playing a role.
Took my breath away. I was like, I just wanted to create an app. I didn't want this.